Kia ora, you're listening to Crossing Currents, Aotearoa New Zealand Artists in Venice, a podcast series by Contemporary Hum produced with the support of Creative New Zealand. In this series, we'll be interviewing the Aotearoa artists presenting at the 60th Venice Biennale and its parallel events. I'm Elena Kafka, Managing Director of Contemporary Hum, and today I speak with artist Robert Jahnke about his work Te Wepu 2023. Te Wepu 2023 is featured in the 2024 edition of Personal Structures, a biennial contemporary art exhibition organised by the European Cultural Centre, or ECC, that runs parallel to the Venice Biennale. Hosted in two beautiful Venetian buildings, Personal Structures is an opportunity for 200 artists from 51 countries to exhibit their work in Venice and forge new professional connections, something that has attracted several artists from Aotearoa in previous years. However, as an exhibition opportunity, Personal Structures is very different to official Biennale events or other curated exhibitions. It isn't strictly a curated event, rather, invited artists have to pay to support their own participation. This results in a range in the quality of the works on display and what are often quite incongruous selections of work. Robert Jahnke is of Ngāi Taharora, Te Whānau a Iritekura, and Te Whānau a Rakairo or Ngāti Porou descent. He is a highly respected artist and educator who works as a historian, teacher, researcher, writer, and advocate for Māori and Indigenous arts nationally and internationally. He was one of the founders of Toyoho Kiapiti, the first Māori visual arts degree in Aotearoa. As an artist, Robert's practice over the years has straddled design, illustration, animation, and sculpture. His work is typically based on political issues that face Māori people, the relationship between Māori and European colonisers, and the impact of Christianity on Māori culture. 3 Aotearoa artists are presenting work in this year's edition, and I was very happy to speak with Robert Jahnke at Personal Structures. We spoke on site at Palazzo Mora during the opening week of the Venice Biennale in April 2024. Congratulations on your involvement. We are not sitting next to your work. We're in a separate room and your work is downstairs. I wonder if you could begin by talking about how you came to present in Personal Structures, what that process was like, and how did you find it?
Well, initially I received an email inviting me to participate. It kind of came out of the blue. So one of the things that they do as part of the European Cultural Centre is feature on educational institutions and, of course, people that teach within those institutions. So that's how it kind of developed, and then through a number of introductions and communications, we kind of, the invitation came a long time before I did this last body of work. So I indicated initially the various compositions associated with the exhibition. But I also had a work that I was thinking of creating around about the same time, and also offered that as a possibility. So it went through several transitions and changes, and finally ended up with the one that's downstairs, which I'm actually really pleased with, because it's the one that was really what the exhibition was about. And it's the one that carries the name of the exhibition, as well as it's the title of a work as well. And it gave me the opportunity, I guess, to create a work that resonated not only with Te Kooti, but also with the previous work of Paratene Matchitt, who passed away maybe a couple of years ago. And so it was kind of my tribute to him, because I'd previously used him as a role model, particularly when I was starting out in creating sculpture back in the 90s. And so he was a very big influence on my use of medium. I guess I think a lot about what medium would suit the technology that I'm working with at any particular time. And so with this body of work, timber and steel, powder-coated steel and two-pot lacquer timber frames kind of is part of the aesthetic, which in a sense is, you know, a kind of reference to Ralph's later work, Ralph Hōtere, when he started using the very, you know, sort of pristine frames to frame a lot of his more abstract works. That's how it came about, and but in the end, I mean, as far as that work downstairs is concerned, Creative New Zealand gave me funding to make it, and so I thank them for that. But they didn't give me any funding to come here and transport the work and all those other, you know, fees associated with it. So all you do is bite the bullet and spend the money and then, you know, turn up. So hence I'm here.
Well, it's absolutely worth it, I think.
Yeah, no, it is, definitely.
Yeah. And speaking of your work, seeing as we are not currently sitting next to it, could you please describe it and its material? Well,
the frames are made, first of all, the frames are, they're a series of triangles, both upright and inverted, and there are 5 in total. The frames are made out of powder-coated mild steel, and they're quite deep, like they're 200 millimeters deep, which means that they stand off the wall, you know, considerably. And then within that frame structure, there are a series of neons, red, white, and blue. And they form patterns that are associated with Te Wepu, which was Te Kooti's battle flag. And so the symbols, I think in the order that they presented down below, begin with the crescent moon. From memory, next to the crescent moon is a triangle, which represents the mountain, because in the original flag, the mountain was an embroidered kind of illusionistic rendering of a mountain. And next to that is the bleeding heart. And then to the right of the bleeding heart is the cross. Yep, the cross. And then finishing off the composition is the star. That star, it happens to be the Star of David. There are a lot of symbols there that, you know, kind of exist within the contemporary context, you know, or have resonance within the contemporary context. But the work, the red, white and blue, by the way, is a reference to the colonial context of Te Kooti's rise to becoming one of the most important prophets, Māori prophets, within Te Ao Māori. It's really, you know, the colours on the New Zealand flag, but it's also the uniform of the colonial soldiers as well. So that's why those colours are there. So with the particular technique, it involves a rear mirror behind the neons, and then there is what's called a one-way glass on the front of the frame. And what that does is creates reflections back in space. I have been seduced by the idea that this reflection, this element of reflection, is not so much light going back into darkness, but light coming out of the darkness, which equates with the Māori concept of te ao marama coming from te kore and also from te pō. So there's throughout the kind of my engagement with the neons, there's always been this kind of conceptual layering associated with cosmogenealogical origins and developments into te ao marama. Probably what's interesting about the use of those symbols is how people will respond to them within the within the contemporary context, because, I mean, they're from a flag that was created in the 1860s, you know, by Catholic nuns in Hawke's Bay, And the flag was created by the Catholic nuns for Ngāti Porou, which is the tribal group in Hawke's Bay. And what's kind of ironic, and a little bit, it's ironic, is that the mountain that they created was a snow-capped mountain, almost like Mount Taranaki, right? But there are no mountains in Hawke's Bay. There are little hills in Hawke's Bay. So, it becomes very iconic in terms of this very structured, symmetrical mountain, really. And, but just the, in creating the other images, they're sewn cutouts of the symbols. So you have a red cutout of the, crescent moon, and then they're stitched with cotton, beautifully, crafted. So it's a very strong flag, it's quite long, so, and it's about 2 feet high. So it's a big flag. And so that's kind of the source of the imagery as far as, how the forms are made.
So I'm really interested to hear more about Paratene Matchitt and how he figures in this work. Well, first maybe actually for the listeners who won't be familiar with Te Kooti,
right? Could
you maybe give a little more background in terms of how he came to be such a resistance leader, right? In 19th century Aotearoa.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because Te Kooti, in 1840, Bishop William Williams arrived in Turanganui-a-Kiwa, which is Gisborne, and started the mission, the Anglican mission there. And of course, Te Kooti was a young adolescent at that time, and obviously attended schools, the missionary schools that were set up by Williams at that time. And by 1865, what happened was the Pai Māori religion, or the Pai Māori followers from Taranaki, had gone further down the east coast into the area that I'm from, and had caused problems in that area in terms of their message. So because where I'm from, the religion down there was Anglican, and there was a very early development of the religion in that area as a consequence of one of the Ngāti Porou slaves returning from North Auckland and actually spreading the message, the Christian message. So by the time the missionaries got there, the Tairāwhiti area, or most of the people in the Tairāwhiti, the hapu and iwi in the Tairāwhiti, were already baptized, and following Christianity. So there was this strong church missionary society focus within that area, and then that was increased with the presence of the missionaries in Gisborne. By 1865, the Pai Māori, their followers from Taranaki, started to move towards Gisborne, and then ended up in Gisborne. And that started a kind of exchange between the colonial forces and also the Pai Māori there. And of course, their appearance in Gisborne led to some early conversions to the Pai Māori religion. So there was all this kind of tension going on in terms of not only religious, but in terms of, intertribal kind of settlements, past settlements, because there was a problem associated with the leaders from the Tairāwhiti area, or from the East Coast, further up on the East Coast, and those in, mainly Rongo-Whakata. So there's always been this kind of tension between those tribal groups. Anyway, Te Kooti was actually part of the Turanganui contingent fighting or assisting the colonial troops to stop the Pai Māori there or to rebel, I guess, the Pai Māori there presence in Turanganui-a-Kiwa. And it ended up that he was accused of actually helping the Paimārire contingent, and ended up getting arrested and essentially imprisoned without trial, and ended up in the Chatham Islands in the post-1863 period. And that's where he had his first vision. He got, as you do, so he got visited by the Almighty, and kind of started to, and he was imprisoned with Paimārire prisoners, and of course there, obviously conversations with them created or formed his belief, his religious system, and he developed what is called the Ringatu religion. And the Ringatu, of course, is hand raised, so when you're Paimārire, you raise your hand when you're, doing karakia. So he set up that movement. And of course, as a consequence of being imprisoned, when he finally escaped from the Chatham Islands on a schooner, which they basically confiscated, returned to Turanganui, and he took revenge on those that had imprisoned him. But it led to the British forces chasing him, and also forces from my tribal area, from Ngāti Porou, also pursuing him all over the place, through the Uruweras in particular. So he had early support from Tūhoi, and he just kept evading them, and then finally ended up in the King Country, where he was allowed by Ngāti Maniopoto and also Tainui to take refuge in that area. Because at that time the King Country had a boundary that Europeans couldn't cross, so that kept him sort of safe for a while. And so by that time it was the 1870s, and in 1873 he had a contingent of followers in Te Kooti that were following him, and they built the very first house, which is the one that became very influential on, houses of that period. One of the things, I guess, as far as what makes him so important as not only as a religious leader, but as an artistic innovator, was that he introduced things that were considered non-traditional or non-customary, or what I call Iritekura. So the carvers that he worked with painted the names of the ancestors on their chests, but not only did he do that, but he allowed them to incorporate mnemonics that allowed people, so his followers, to identify tupuna. So for example, Maui tiki tiki a taranga. And that's another thing that happened. One of the things that he did was also reintroduce demigods from the past, and Maui is a particular example. Hine Nui Te Pō is another one. And Maui, of course, had the sun on his shoulder, he had a rope, and then between his legs he had a waka, which kind of related to his fishing up of the North Island. So there was this kind of liberal visual vocabulary that he introduced and was responsible for introducing. I should say that he wasn't the originator of text, introducing text. That was introduced in 1843 in another house in Gisborne under a carver called Raharuhi Rukupo, and but followed that tradition and actually made it bolder, so it was like in your face, and it was on all the images, all the carvings. The other thing that he did was also develop a very strong tradition of lattice work structure. Within the Wharenui context, as far as the ancestors are concerned, it tends to be on the side walls, and normally you have carved popo. And in between the carved popo, you normally have lattice work, and lattice work is created by juxtaposing or creating a lattice really out of kakaho, and then over the top of the kakaho are horizontal, they're organised vertically, and over the top, horizontally on top of the kakaho are the timber slats. And the timber slats are then held together by a series of cross stitches. And in developing the cross stitches, patterns are also created. So under his regime, for example, he introduced the figurative imagery into the lattice work, whereas previously they were just totally non-figurative. Also text crept into the lattice work as well. And even in other areas, following his example in that house, naturalistic imagery started to appear also in the lattice work. So he was kind of liberal. He was breaking all the rules, you know, if there are rules at a particular time, or conventions associated with a particular time. So he was very innovative in that. And the other thing he was innovative for was introducing naturalistic painting, particularly on the front wall of the house. You know, so there is he's responsible for a lot of innovative developments within the whare Rakairo. So when Para became aware of how important he was as a leader, and so he developed a whole series of paintings, and they were, you know, a lot of Para's paintings, early paintings, were based on, or came out of, an engagement between modernism and also customary or traditional Māori art practice, and fusing the two. So there's a strong reference in his work to the woven arts in particular, and to very strong patterns, like there's patterns like Diho Taniwha, which are the teeth of our mythical beings, and also Kaukau, which is a strong pattern about challenging order, or challenging systems, or challenging regimes, or challenging political parties, whatever they may be. And in doing that, within that is the kind of challenges, or a reference to the challenges that Te Kooti was part of, or undertaking during his reign as a prophet. And so I guess one of the things that, if you're familiar with Paratene Matchitt's work, he picked on iconic elements and then used those iconic elements to create sculptures out of them, you know. Like he did a series of sculptures which were created out of corrugated iron and timber, and took these symbols and created sculptural forms. If you can imagine a moon-shaped structure, made it out of corrugated iron with an oblique angle so you can see the moon, and then the timber structures were inside that, playing against a negative, so he played with a lot of negative, positive. And those all came, you know, those were all references to Te Kooti and his, I guess, visual vocabulary, you know. And in a sense, what I'm doing is just really kind of taking them and injecting them with new life.
Yeah. This flag produced by these nuns, that was repurposed by Te Kooti.
Yeah, definitely.
And then repurposed again by Paratene.
Definitely.
And now you again are repurposing them in a new sort of context.
No,
so, yeah, when you speak about giving them new life, how do you imagine that new life?
Yeah, well, I mean, new life is pretty, you know, just throw a bit of electric power in them.
Yeah.
You can't get any more, you know, electrifying than that.
Exactly.
But it revitalises it in a different way, because, you know, both Te Kooti and Paratene Matchitt relied on relief sculpture, you know, a relief sculptural tradition. But also, in Para's case, there was some play on mass and void, but also shadow casting as well. But they had, they were working with the conventions of that particular period, or Te Kooti was working in the conventions of a particular period. And of course the other thing that Te Kooti did in a lot of his houses too, or he inspired people to move away from using traditional lattice work, and instead of using the kākaho and the timber slats, they started using tongue and groove, for example, to replicate patterns. So those were innovations as well. And yeah, now I lost track now. What was the question?
No, that's fantastic. Yes, so I think it's a question about this original source of this flag and the way that these symbols have been reappropriated or repurposed through time, and maybe what the significance is of them being represented now in Venice or now in 2024 for you. In addition to the reference to the song sort of whakapapa as well.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah. So it brings that tradition. It brings Te Kooti with it. It brings Para's engagement with it. But for me, I kind of like, the opportunity to put it up in Venice was really an opportunity to get a sense of how Italians might react to it, or how international visitors might react to these particular symbols, and they'll have no idea what it means, as far as looking at the symbols are concerned. But they may say, well, within my culture, this is what it means. I wonder if he, is thinking about that. And I kind of like that idea of being able to take like an ancient symbol and kind of putting it in a contemporary context and to see how people respond to that. And of course, people see things differently. You can't direct people to see things in a particular way. And all you can do is really just place them there and get people to respond to it. And in the same way, they might sort of look at the way that the triangles are organized in terms of three that are presented in the normal triangular format, where you have the base and then you have the apex of the triangle. And then there are two others that are inverted, and probably in terms of the inversion, they would probably just see it as a kind of a tricky way of putting the patterns together. But it's more than that, and it's a reference to the cloaks, the hems, I should say, of kākahu, and particularly there's a particular pattern which is called aronui, and aronui is just a series of triangles that flip as they move along the base. And that whole notion is really about, I guess, standardization and conservation and repetition, so that it's kind of establishing a normality in a sense, and but it depends what you put inside that triangle that changes the context of that meaning.
And I wanted to ask you about mataaho, of course, because you taught Bridget Reweti, Terry Te Tau, and Irene Araperi Baker, and they have work in the curated section of the Biennale. So I wondered what it feels like for you to have that kind of intergenerational representation in Venice.
It's stunning. And I'm just, and the fact that Bridget couldn't come over because she's hapu and she's having a baby is even quite amazing. And not only that, you see, Bridget's also a co-editor with another one of my students that I've got, which is Matariki.
Matariki Williams,
And then she sends me an email to do a edit on one of the papers that is going to appear in the next magazine. And so it's great to see them not only engaging in art, but also engaging in promoting art within another arena, another realm. So they're doing great things, and
yeah.
I mean, I'm so proud of them. I mean, you know, what can I say? They're doing better than I. You know.
I mean, you're also in Venice. You made it.
Yeah. But I was going to say, it was incredible that this moment happened in terms of getting the invitation to come here. And I didn't want to miss it for the world, so I mean, that's why I just, after missing out on the Creative New Zealand funding, I decided I'm just going to go anyway, you know, and just make the most of the time that I'm here. And of course, I wanted also to come here because Brett is here, and then of course, not only is Brett here, but there are work by, you know, artists who do it. I mean, the older artists that I know, which is Fred Graham, Brett's dad, Sandy Atzett, and also Selwyn Wilson, who I met years ago when he was teaching in North Auckland, you know, and I was sort of a young teacher within South Auckland. And so it's here to support them as well, you know, and be here in sort of body and spirit, in a sense.
And so there are these entanglements between
Yes.
you and all the...
No, that's right.
Yeah.
But you can't help them. That's been Māori.
Yeah. And then maybe just to close on that note, there is such strong Māori representation at the Biennale this year. It's really...
Yeah, there is.
It's unprecedented.
No, definitely.
Do you have any specific feelings about what that kind of representation means or how it's changed over time?
Well, I think, you know, when you think back over the years and the number of Māori that actually have been part of the Venice Biennale, it's actually pretty big, you know, percentage-wise, when you think about it. And, you know, but this is kind of like a climactic moment in a sense, because you have the older kaumātua. I mean, Fred is 96, for heaven's sake. And he's still making art, you know, and he's represented at the Venice Biennale, and his son's here at the Biennale. And then you have these young ones, you know, you have Mataho and their strength, you know, in terms of working collaboratively together, and, you know, and I've seen their developments in terms of their experimentation. This is probably the best work, I think, of their development, only because it is the one that has moved into using new technology in terms of, you know, ratchet strainers, but letting the material itself kind of create the patterns, the rhythms, the repetitions, and, you know, which is like making a cloak, but using new medium to make the cloak, you know, and it's so versatile as a form that you can, you know, you can use the reflective side of the material, or you can use the matte side. And so what they decided this time to do is turn it over, you know, to flip it, and it just does something completely different. Wow. And I was always interested to see how they were going to navigate or negotiate the columns. So I'll see that eventually. But from what I've seen, it looks like they've done a really good job. I mean, that's improvisation on it, you know, which is pretty cool.
To the highest degree.
Definitely, yeah. Pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Crossing Currents, Aotearoa New Zealand Artists in Venice, an original podcast series by Contemporary Hum. Listen to Crossing Currents wherever you get your podcasts, or visit contemporaryhum.com for each episode, along with a transcript and images. Our thanks to Creative New Zealand for their support, Hamish Peterson for editing and mixing, Matariki Williams for cultural advisory, and Emma Kanyuk for design. Kia ora.